The third type of glaucoma is called pigmentary glaucoma. So, the word pigmentary is exactly what happens here. The iris pigments are going to get deposited in the angle. There will be an excessive, the pathogenesis is because of an excessive shedding of iris pigments, and these iris pigments will go and clog the trabecular meshwork. Why does this happen? Why is it that pigments are released in some people? Because of the deformity of the iris. The iris has this characteristic mid-peripheral concavity. Okay, so what happens? This is the normal structure of the iris. As you can see here, this is the normal structure of the iris. But what do you see here? You see here that there is a concavity. The iris has undergone a concavity. So, this concavity is causing the posterior surface of the iris. The posterior surface of the iris is going to constantly rub against the zonules. So, what happens when there is constant rubbing of the posterior surface of the iris against the zonules? Pigments are going to be constantly released. So, when these pigments are constantly released, it can go and get deposited in the angle and cause a clogging of the trabecular meshwork. So, this is very characteristically seen in young myopic males, and it kind of resembles primary open line glaucoma. There is a lot of fluctuation in the intraocular pressure, and this photo I have just put up here to show you the deposition of pigments. This is the deposition of pigments, iris pigments, and this is how the iris concavity looks. So, this area will constantly rub against the zonules and release the pigments. Now, this green area that you see is actually to show you that this is how we do a laser peripheral iridotomy to manage these patients. The minute you do an iridotomy, this will remove this mid-peripheral concavity and it will cause the iris to become flat. So, the pathogenesis, like I just mentioned, is it goes by the name a reverse pupillary block. So, what is happening? The mid-peripheral iris there is a posterior bowing of the mid-peripheral iris. When it bows posteriorly, it rubs against the zonules and there is a build-up of pressure. So, this building of pressure is called a reverse pupillary block, and that can result in a pigment dispersion syndrome. So, what are we going to see in the eye? You are going to see a characteristic Krukenberg spindle, which is what you are seeing in this picture. So, this area has deposition of iris pigments in the form of a spindle, and this is present on, this is usually identified on slit lamp examination. So, when you see this spindle shaped deposition of iris pigments, usually we need to examine the angle of these patients to rule out a pigment dispersion syndrome. You will also see what you call mid-peripheral iris transillumination defects. I told you in pseudoexfoliation, there is transillumination defects, but it occurs in the periphery of the iris. But here, corresponding to the mid-peripheral bowing of the iris, you have these iris transillumination defects. And you will also have a pigmented trabecular meshwork. Now, the deposition of pigments anterior to the, I told you for all patients we have to do a gonioscopy. So, when you do a gonioscopy will show you, gonioscopy is a study of angle structures. So, gonioscopy shows you the highly pigmented trabecular meshwork. Okay. Then the second thing it will show you is what you call a Sampolicis line. That is a Sampolicis line. Sampolicis line usually means that there is a very prominent line in front of the Schwalbe's line. Okay, prominent deposits anterior to Schwalbe's line. That's what it means, Sampolicis line. So, this will be present in all patients with pseudoexfoliation. So, what you are seeing here is the classical iris transillumination defects. This arrow is pointing to you to all those reddish areas that you see. These are the transillumination, and it is typically present in the mid-peripheral area of the iris. So, this is one of the diagnostic features of pigment dispersion syndrome. And another important thing to look for is called Zentmeyer's line. Zentmeyer's line is when you have these pigments being deposited in the zonules, and you can also have a shy band, which is presence of these pigments on the anterior lens capsule. So, we need to know that basically all these noun and proper nouns and all these names indicates that there is a particular name given to the area of deposition. So, we have a Krukenberg spindle, we have a Sample-Assis line, we have a Scheib band and we have a Zantmeyer's line.